volunteer organization. Talented people don't want to follow me anywhere. They want to co-create with me the future. My job is to nurture the bottom up and not let it degenerate into chaos. How did he see his role? I'm a role model. I'm a human glue. I'm a connector. I'm an aggregator of viewpoints. I'm never a dictator of viewpoints. Advice about how you exercise the role?
I wrote about politics, economics, and corporate affairs, and I could have chosen to specialize in any of those fields, but I picked design because I believe it's one of the most powerful tools at our disposal to improve our quality of life. Thank you, fellow TED design buffs. And greatly as I admire the achievements of professional designers, which have been extraordinary and immense, I also believe that design benefits hugely from the originality, the lateral thinking, and the resourcefulness of its rebels.
Raisuddin. Mark, you should know that I am praying for God, the most compassionate and gracious. I forgive you, and I do not hate you. I never hated you. Stroman, you are a remarkable person. Thank you from my heart. I love you, bro. Even more amazingly, after the execution, Raisuddin reached out to Stroman's eldest daughter, Amber, an ex-convict and an addict, and offered his help. You may have lost a father.
Dreams. And it's because of those words that I stand here right now, full of passion, asking you to be brave for the kids who are dreaming those dreams today. You see, I want them to look at a CEO on television and say, I can be like her, or he looks like me. And I want them to know that anything is possible, that they can achieve the highest level that they ever imagine, that they will be welcome in any corporate boardroom, or they can lead any company.
Organizations like the C40, like ICLE, which I mentioned, have been working together many, many years before Copenhagen. In Copenhagen, 4 or 5 years ago, 184 nations came together to explain to one another why their sovereignty didn't permit them to deal with the grave, grave crisis of climate change. But the mayor of Copenhagen had invited 200 mayors to attend. They came, they stayed, and they found ways, and are still finding ways, to work together, city to city and through intercity organizations. 80% of carbon emissions come from cities.
And I operated the mechanical brooms and I plowed the snow. It was a remarkable privilege and an amazing education. Everyone asks about the smell. It's there, but it's not as prevalent as you think. And on days when it is really bad, you get used to it rather quickly. The weight takes a long time to get used to. I knew people who were several years on the job whose bodies were still adjusting to the burden of bearing on your body tons of trash every week. Then there's the danger. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, sanitation.
Look out there, and I saw light, because the day's easier than the night, and I thought we were coming into day. And I saw a stream of white light along the horizon. And I said, it's going to be morning soon. She said, no, those are the lights of Key West. It was 15 more hours, which for most swimmers would be a long time. You have no idea how many 15-hour training swims I had done. So here we go, and I somehow, without a decision,
years were helped, and for that work, when I was a final year law student, I was chosen as the Young Australian of the Year, and I was catapulted from one piece of the jigsaw to another, and their edges didn't fit. Tarnley anonymous Footscray resident was now Tarnley refugee and social activist, invited to speak in venues she had never heard of, and into homes whose existence she could never have imagined. I didn't know the protocols. I didn't know how to use the cutlery. I didn't know how to talk about wine. I didn't know how to talk about anything.
I told him to tell me not what he sees, but what he feels.
So cool.
He told me he felt insignificant. I knew immediately what he was seeing.
As you journey down the river, the rapids in the Grand Canyon just get more and more intense. It can be absolutely terrifying.
You have to work through this thing in your head where you're going to submit yourself to going through this rapid.
In the title.
I see. So he said publish it just as Alice Lee.
Yes, and she insisted. Still, I want the paper treated as hers.
That's great of Pearson, I suppose, isn't it?
It is really nice. It is really nice.
So Alice Lee for you is sort of today you describe her as a very good working scientist. She'd be a fellow of the Royal Society probably today, but not this kind of Einstein or a Newton.
She's
So, but
absolutely
that's
not. No, most scientists, most great scientists are not.
I don't know a whole lot about how potential increases of my salary are going to work. I think that in the future, my salary might be structured differently because my job has a sales focus to it. I do have a little bit of a commission, and that I've included in my salary of $42,000. So it can fluctuate depending on what my commission rate is at any particular time. My salary might change in the way that I get a lower base salary but a higher commission, or the other way around.
Not as I mean, obviously it's collaborator, you're acknowledging your collaborators in a way which is very great, sort of transparent and open source in a way, shout out to the MetaHaven intern. But I'd like to talk to you about Boss, about Holly Herndon as the sort of orchestrator behind this, in an open-ended way. Like, how do you negotiate being in all these very complex, very engaged relationships with lots of different collaborators, and yet at the end of the day, it's your name, it's your face in the album cover, and
why? Well, let me put it in a broader context. Our country faces a lot of challenges. We, as you mentioned, 20 million Americans would like a full-time job and can't get one. We have growing inequality. We have environmental problems that threaten the future of our planet. I think we can use our tax system to create a better society, to be an expression of our true values.
I get a free first-class ticket for a companion?
Yes.
If I just use this card?
Yes, if you use it with certain airlines.
Which?
I'll give you the list, all right?
Okay. I'm sure it's on your website.
But what's most important is that we find a good percentage of Centurion members, in fact, own their own business. And people, in fact, are rational. And the reality is that and they own medium-sized businesses where they don't have all the concierge services.
Did this actually start as a small business card? And
it didn't. It didn't.
It started off as a luxury card.
It started off as a card.
So I wrote this letter and I was like, will you tell me how to design my life? TED is about T-E-D. The D is about design, the designed life. So I said, will you help me design my life? And I was so excited. 4 days later, I got this letter back from my grandpa. I read it and it said, sorry, Ty, I can't help you. The modern world's too complicated. You will never find all the answers from just one person. If you're lucky, a handful of people along the way will point the way. And I was like, right, so much for my shortcut. But 7 days later, a package came. It was books.
A mind of clarity, where I could finally see my earthly ways of irregularity, realizing it wasn't about me or the life that I live, but about the one who saved me, the one who forgives. See, I was entitled, I was deserving, But what I was eligible for was that I should be burning, separated from him who I would daily forsake, all for the purpose of making my name great. But see, that's why Christ stepped in with unconditional love 2,000 years ago, coming from his heaven above, humbling himself in this world so he could die in my place, putting to death all my sins because of his grace.
Home, because I loved writing more than I hated failing at writing, which is to say that I loved writing more than I loved my own ego, which is ultimately to say that I loved writing more than I loved myself. And that's how I pushed through it. But the weird thing is that 20 years later, during the crazy ride of Eat, Pray, Love, I found myself identifying all over again with that unpublished young diner waitress who I used to be, thinking about her constantly and feeling like I was her again, which made no rational sense whatsoever because our lives could not have been more different. She had failed constantly. I had succeeded beyond my wildest expectation. We had nothing in common. Why did I suddenly feel like I was her all over again? And it was only...
But first, I want you to make a little confession to me. In the past year, I want you to just raise your hand if you've experienced relatively little stress. Anyone? How about a moderate amount of stress? Who's experienced a lot of stress? Yeah, me too. But that is not my confession. My confession is this. I am a health psychologist, and my mission is to help people be happier and healthier. But I fear that something I've been
It's something that I also like to call a state of grace. It's just like show up, right place, right time, synchronicities. It just seems like life becomes a hand-in-glove experience, and it's available to all of us. But we have to move through those 4 stages. And it can be in one fell swoop, or you dig your way toward it with as much resistance as you want to put into it. But eventually we're all going to move in that direction, so why not now?
Growing up, that I think a lot of teenagers are fresh out of high school. It's a very vulnerable time, and I had always been very, very shy in my lifetime. I couldn't make eye contact with people. I have a very soft-spoken voice because I just never really thought that what I had to say even was important to be heard. And to go through classes and to constantly be putting yourself out there with the safety net of having other students around you that are also putting themselves out there, and then having a teacher there that's constantly giving you the tools.
That's a given, but we're not even enjoying it. I mean, like...
What do you mean by that?
We're burning through all this carbon, we're creating all this pollution and all this plastic. We've increased the rate of extinction.
But what do you mean by not
and no
enjoying
one's happy.
It?
Oh. You could almost say, if we were burning all these fossil fuels and creating all this waste, and if everybody on the planet was joyful, you could say, at least people are happy. But the more we damage the earth, the more miserable we become. And what I mean is, you look at prescriptions for antidepressants, people going to therapy, rates of crime.
But I think we need to do it like we did it for HIV/AIDS, which is to work from the bottom up. Start with fundamental research, then translate that research into new therapeutics for our patients. You can compare that to leaving no stone unturned. The fundamental scientists, the ones who make the basic discoveries, are turning over those stones, and the translational researchers who translate those basic discoveries.
My perspective. Do I want to see the circumstances good or bad? That old glass half full, half empty concept. So I began thinking about how I can take this unfortunate situation and rather than suffer because of it, how I can benefit from it, make it an advantage. When you really think about what a setback is, it's kind of a unique thing because it's an opportunity to take a step backwards and reapproach the challenge that you're facing. But this time, to come back
pierce the veil.
And on the question that you ask about Hinkley Point, I will be doing exactly as you said indeed in your question, Jason, which is, as you know, I'll be looking at all the evidence around this issue. The way I work is that I don't just take an instant decision. I actually look at the evidence, take the advice, consider it properly, and then come to a decision. And I've been very clear that I will be doing that and will be taking a decision sometime this month.
It is absolutely true that I believe.
I particularly love aesthetic experiences because they seem to archetypalize the world. They seem to turn any object into something that stands for all of its class. A landscape looks like a landscape painting, right? A work of art hanging in the walls of a museum is simultaneously separated from all context. It can thus come into the light and be seen for the first time. It forces contemplation. It forces a response. And perhaps it is this response that is the aesthetic experience that we're.
Or so in exactly the same way, if I think all the time, I won't have anything to think about except thoughts. So in order to have something to think about, there are times when you simply must stop thinking. Well, how do you do that? The first rule is don't try to. Because if you do, you will be like someone trying to make rough water smooth with a flat iron. And all that will do will stir it up.
I also want to acknowledge Mayor Kasim Reed and County Chairman John Eves for welcoming us to the great state of Georgia and the beautiful city of Atlanta. I am pleased to be joined by our tireless Secretary of the VA, Bob McDonnell. I know he spoke to you yesterday. He is working hard, every single day to transform the VA to serve our veterans better. He still gives out his cell phone number and his email. Not many people know this, but so far he's received more than 45,000 calls.
A long time that I've been in that position. I get that. I get it. And it's always amusing to me that when I have a job, I have really high approval ratings when I'm actually doing the work. I get reelected with 67% of the vote running for reelection in the Senate. When I'm Secretary of State, I have 66% approval rating. And then I seek a job. I run for a job, and all of the discredited negativity comes out again, and all these arguments and attacks start up. So it seems
Picard is a poster child for what I call scout mindset. It's the drive not to make one idea win or another lose, but just to see what's really there as honestly and accurately as you can, even if it's not pretty or convenient or pleasant. And this mindset is what I'm personally passionate about, and what I've spent the last few years examining and trying to figure out what causes scout mindset. Why are some people, sometimes at least, able to cut through their own prejudices and biases and motivations?
And so I was looking through the vegetation with my binoculars, and I recognized this as the one chimpanzee who'd begun to lose his fear before the others. And he was very distinctive. Every chimpanzee looks different once you get used to chimpanzee faces. And he was easy because he had this beautiful white beard, and I had already named him David Greybeard. And as I watched through my binoculars, I saw him reach out, pick a piece of grass stem, push it down into the termite mound, leave it for a moment, pull it out, and pick off the termite.
I draw with soft pastel, which is dry, like charcoal, but colors. I consider my work drawings, but others call them painting. I cringe, though, when I'm referred to as a finger painter. But I don't use any tools, and I have always used my fingers and palms to manipulate the pigment on the paper. Drawing is a form of meditation for me. It quiets my mind. I don't perceive what I'm drawing as ice or water. Instead, the image is stripped down to its most basic form of color and shape.
I spent nearly a decade observing up close and personal exceptional leaders of innovation. We studied 16 men and women located in 7 countries across the globe, working in 12 different industries. In total, we spent hundreds of hours on the ground, on site, watching these leaders in action. We ended up with pages and pages and pages of field notes that we analyzed to look for patterns in what our leaders did. The bottom line, if we want to build organizations that can innovate time and again, we must unlearn our conventional notions of leadership. Leading innovation is not about creating a vision.
That, if I challenge people to build the equipment they need out of the garbage I find, it's a great way to foster creativity. And what happened was that artists and scientists from around the world started coming to my lab. And it's not just because we value unconventional ideas, it's because we test and validate them with scientific rigor. So one day I was hacking something, I was taking it apart, and I had this sudden idea. Could I treat biology like hardware? Could I dismantle a biological system, mix and match the parts, and then put it back together in some new and creative way?
And I got to work on a new approach for breast cancer patients that could do a better job of telling the healthy cells from the unhealthy or cancer cells. It's a drug called Herceptin. And what Herceptin allowed us to do is to precisely target HER2-positive breast cancer. At the time, the scariest form of breast cancer. And that precision let us hit hard the cancer cells while sparing and being more gentle on the normal cells.
In front of me so I don't walk past it and look like I'm floating in midair. Right now I'm standing in the open air on a beach under a palm tree in the exact spot where your stage used to be. I have 12 minutes with you. I set a limit. My wife Naveed once said that infinite possibility is a creator's worst enemy. For example, this dress, I'd asked her to design something that a priest might have worn in 23rd century Cairo, but
I'm not even sure I know how to figure out how to get there. For sure, there are times when visionary leadership is exactly what is needed. But if we want to build organizations that can innovate time and again, we must recast our understanding of what leadership is about. Leading innovation is about creating the space where people are willing and able to do the hard work of innovative problem solving. So, at this point, some of you may be wondering, well, what does that leadership really look like? Well, at Pixar, they understand that innovation takes a village. So the leaders focus on
I witnessed an interaction that changed my life forever. It was a conversation between 2 women. One of the women was white and one was black. And the white woman said, this is going to sound very anachronistic now, the white woman said, all women face the same oppression as women. All women are similarly situated in patriarchy, and therefore all women have a kind of intuitive solidarity or sisterhood. And the black woman said, I'm not so sure. Let me ask you a question. So the black woman says to the white woman,
Now, okay, I know probably you're thinking now, she's crazy. You can't do that. That's too ambitious. But here's the thing. We're already doing this in a limited way, and it's already starting to make a big difference. So here's what's happening. Now, I told you I trained as a cancer doctor, but like many, many doctors who trained in San Francisco in the 80s, I also trained as an AIDS doctor. It was a terrible time. AIDS was a death sentence. All my patients died.
I scattered my mother's ashes amidst the melting ice. Now she remains a part of the landscape she loved so much, even as it too passes and takes on new form. Among the many gifts my mother gave me was the ability to focus on the positive rather than the negative. My drawings celebrate the beauty of what we all stand to lose. I hope they can serve as records of sublime landscapes in flux, documenting the transition and
I still remember young women being driven to my clinic by their moms, adults who had to be helped into my exam room by their mothers. They were so weak from the treatment I had given them. But at the time, in those front lines on the war on cancer, we had few tools. And the tools we did have couldn't differentiate between the cancer cells that we wanted to hit hard and those healthy cells that we wanted to preserve.
And I could have chosen to specialize in any of those fields, but I picked design because I believe it's one of the most powerful tools at our disposal to improve our quality of life. Thank you, fellow TED design buffs. And greatly as I admire the achievements of professional designers, which have been extraordinary and immense, I also believe that design benefits hugely from the originality, the lateral thinking, and the resourcefulness of its rebels and renegades. And we're living at a remarkable moment in
kept going back to that thing that Naveed said to me that day in Azadi Square, that without that basic constraint, a universe that granted mass matter, we would not exist. That's one rule. Another rule is that all mass is subject to entropy. And there is no way to be in this universe without mass. I know, I tried everything. I tried creating a photon box where the Higgs field was altered. I tried recording all subatomic movements in my body and replaying them on closed loop. Nothing worked. Because she looked at me and said, I thought you'd say that. Think deeper. And then she took off her belt, this belt that I'm wearing now. And she said, our universe is built so that particles have mass. Without that basic constraint, we'd have just passed right through each other at the speed of light and never even known. And that's how our romance began.
I consider my work drawings, but others call them painting. I cringe, though, when I'm referred to as a finger painter. But I don't use any tools, and I have always used my fingers and palms to manipulate the pigment on the paper. Drawing is a form of meditation for me. It quiets my mind. I don't perceive what I'm drawing as ice or water. Instead, the image is stripped down to its most basic form of color and shape. Once the piece is complete, I can finally experience the composition.
Now, I remember recently seeing an updated pie chart, and the pie chart was labeled Causes of Death in Children Under 5 Worldwide. And there was a pretty big section of that pie chart, about 40%. 40% was labeled neonatal. Now, neonatal is not a cause of death. Neonatal is simply an adjective that means that the child is less than 1 month old. For me, neonatal said, we have no idea. Now, I'm a scientist, I'm a doctor.
I cite those statistics around corporate board diversity because they are real. And I stand here today talking about this issue of racial discrimination because I believe it threatens to rob another generation of all the opportunities that all of us want for all of our children, no matter what their color or where they come from. And I think it also threatens to hold back businesses. You see, researchers have coined this term color blindness to describe a learned behavior where we pretend that we don't notice race. If you happen to be surrounded by a bunch of people who look like you, that's purely accidental.
And I had to compromise the matter as indicated in the title.
I see. So he said publish it just as Alice Lee.
Yes, and she insisted. Still, I want the paper treated as hers.
That's great of Pearson, I suppose, isn't it?
It is really nice. It is really nice.
So Alice Lee for you is so today you describe her as a very good working scientist. She'd be a fellow of the Royal Society probably today, but not this kind of Einstein or a Newton.
She's absolutely not. No, most scientists. I accidentally found out about her, and she is as good a scientist as any of the others who worked at the time. She was involved in measuring the volume of the skull in order to find out something about what's inside.
I suppose from a modern perspective, it's almost the first thing a modern scientist would think of. Well, I'll start making some measurements. So why is that a radical move?
It was at that time a question, how come that we have, the important men of science? Are they really superior because they have bigger brains?
In the way that I get a lower base salary but a higher commission, or the other way around, a higher base salary but a lower commission. People come into this field because they love to explore, they're adventurous, they like to try new things, and they're excited about sharing their passion with other people. And I love surrounding myself with like-minded people who equally believe that through wilderness experience, we can change our communities and therefore make the world a better place. And I've found that to be true whether I'm teaching skiing at a down-home ski resort in the winter or guiding trips for partnership with Backpacker Magazine, and I was able to help them co-create some online outdoor skills classes. And I got to help write the curriculum and do the filming of these classes. And that was something I never even knew that Outward Bound did on a regular basis. And then stepping into a more office and supportive type of role, I was able to be an active member of that project. Because I've only been in my job for 1 year, I don't know a whole lot about how potential increases of my salary are going to work. I think that in the future, my salary might be structured.
I also have aspects of my set that are totally euphoric, and it's kind of even going in a more kind of euphoric direction as I've expanded to include Matt and Colin in the band. But, just if promoters know that it's like a time in the night when people really just need to be like slapped in the face with a 4/4, then they're probably not going to want to listen to me doing Breathe. So maybe don't put me in that slot. But I think audiences have I don't know if this is just, I don't know if my booking agent and the promoters are getting better at slotting me or if audiences are evolving, but I feel like it's become, I think a lot of that's just through really good curation. So I've worked with a lot of amazing promoters who know that I also have aspects of my set that are totally euphoric, and it's kind of even going in a more kind of euphoric direction as I've expanded to include Matt and Colin in the band. But, if promoters know that it's like a time in the night when people really just need to be slapped in the face with a 4/4, then they're probably not going to want to listen to me doing Breathe. So maybe don't put me in that slot. But I think audiences have I don't know if this is in software development. I know I keep talking about Matt Dryhurst, but I'm going to bring it up again. He just released a piece of software called Saga that's all around kind of this idea of self-hosting and artists having their own agency of the work that they release online. So I find that kind of stuff really inspiring, and I love it when artists are really kind of awake and aware and interested in kind of having some sort of agency in where the conversation is going. And I feel just on top of that, I feel like that takes a degree of optimism. I feel like I love a dystopian artwork, and I love post-apocalyptic. Go through periods where I just don't listen to anything at all. Fair enough.
I guess one thing that was kind of like interesting or eye-opening about Unsound was kind of the shift of production technique over the last couple of years. So Richie Houghton did like a guest DJ set at the end of the night, unannounced, which was actually really cool on the smaller stage. After listening to the production technique throughout the day, you know, people like Angel Ho and you know, Visionist and Jay Lynn, all the synth, and then I set up a few different patches and processes, and I was able to just kind of like sing in the idea, and it was like 1,000 times easier than trying to get the glissando at that exact moment. And so sometimes it is just like more immediate to kind of set up a process and then just like sing it out.
Yeah, and it's kind of, to me, I actually misread it when I first saw the quote. I'm like, sometimes it's easier to sing an idea than it is to say it. And so, but this is this, I'm thinking, so, and which also makes sense in this idea of the ways in which a sound can carry so much. And so I think like the home is one of these examples of like, you know, it's this wonderful sort of inversion of the love song, you know, the NSA agent. But even if I didn't know any of that and I just came to it, you know, it's like this ideas of voice, of processing. You mentioned cutting off the attack and the end delay, and this idea of kind of contemporary existence as being endlessly mediated in a way which is suddenly beautiful and then suddenly distancing and troubling, and you're kind of just negotiating that within the song. And then if you want to start looking at the logos and thinking about Snowden, you can do that as well, or you can just sort of feel what that might be like through that.
And of course I have to let go sometimes and be like, I'm not going to micromanage this. You know, there are decisions that were made where if it was all up to me, I would have been like, no. But then I kind of, you know, did this like, like, okay, I'm going to let it go. And then in the end, I was glad that, you know, like I said no to lip singing to Home for like weeks. They were like, you have to. And I was like, hell no, I'm not lip singing. But finally it came around, and actually I needed to. Like, it works really well in that context.
Oh, that's great. I guess there's one last quick question. What's the last bit of, I don't know, essay, sound, gallery show or whatever that's inspired?
And I just loved this kind of like super dramatic sweeping violin kind of thing, and so I was trying to figure out how to do that with a synth, and then I set up a few different patches and processes, and I was able to just kind of like sing in the idea, and it was like 1,000 times easier than trying to get the glissando at that exact moment. And so sometimes it is just like more immediate to kind of set up a process and then just like sing it out.
Yeah, and it's kind of, to me, I actually misread it when I first saw the quote. I'm like, sometimes it's
started, you know, from when movement came out to today, I feel like people's have shifted their perspective. People are more open to things. I feel like, you know, genres are more smashed together. I feel like pop isn't as dirty of a word as it was several years ago. It's funny, I was at Unsound a couple weeks ago, and it's like everyone was smiling and dancing. Not that people weren't smiling at Unsound 3 years ago, but it was definitely more like this kind of thing. And this year it was more kind of like this kind of thing. And it was like, I don't know, I just think that attitudes and shifts awkward. I mean, I've certainly played super awkward concerts, and I've put myself in all kinds of weird situations, but I feel like you always kind of learn something from those and you get something out of it. I remember we did this one tour where it was like everything was perfect, and it was really boring because it was like, oh, we didn't really have to face anything that was like weird and like not upsetting, but challenging in a way. So I think it's good to constantly be shifting environments and not just kind of like get in this rut of like, okay, this is my safe zone. I know that people are going to need to hear this filter sweep at this moment, and that's going to hit, you know, it's like, it's good to challenge yourself and the audience in that way, I think. But that, I feel like that takes a degree of optimism. I feel like I love a dystopian artwork, and I love, like, you know, post-apocalyptic, like, of course, I love science fiction, like we all do. And I think that I also draw on those aesthetics sometimes, but I feel like when we're constantly in that kind of negative zone or in that kind of like fatalistic zone, I feel like in a way that kind of is like, whoop, well, I can't do anything. You know, it kind of like takes the burden off of us. So I feel like we have to pair that with like a degree of optimism and a degree of kind of like
the laptop being this very intimate instrument. You know, it's like we are